terrifying day, and the different reactions of people recorded in the Gospels can teach us so much. So I am calling this sermon, Bribery, a Hysterical Woman and the Living Lord, Responses to the Resurrection. Let me start by introducing you to three main groups of people who feature in this story, and then we're going to examine how they responded to Jesus' resurrection. Firstly, the religious leaders. Secondly, Jesus' closest 11 male disciples. There were 12 until Judas joined the wrong side. And thirdly, a frequently overlooked group, the woman who followed Jesus. So let's meet the religious leaders of the Jewish people. Who were they? Well, they were the chief priests and the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. These people were meant to be the spiritual shepherds of the nation of Israel. And yet in Jesus' time, they had largely been corrupted by their position of power. They had become authoritarian and hypocritical. They were flattering and submissive to the Roman occupation, but harsh to the Jewish people who struggled under their legalistic burdens. In their hearts, they loved accolades, not God, and they did not tolerate questioning. Jesus got up their noses from the very start because he flipped the social hierarchy that gave them power. He accused them of hypocrisy in startling terms. Jesus claimed a closer relationship with God than they had for all their piety, and he proved it by freeing people from evil spirits and healing the sick. Several times the religious leaders tried to kill Jesus on the grounds of blasphemy, but the real motivation was because he was a dangerous threat to their authority. Even as the evidence started stacking up that Jesus really was the long-awaited Messiah, these religious leaders were determined to save face at all costs. Things like having a change of heart, humbling themselves, accepting they were wrong, those are just not things they were willing to consider. Jesus became their mountain to die on. Okay, and who were Jesus' disciples? A motley band of 12 Jewish men, diverse in age and reputation, but handpicked by Jesus to absorb his teaching as they spent 3 years sharing his life, his travel, and his ministry. They came to love Jesus as their dear friend and teacher and put their hope in him as the Messiah. However, as we see in the Gospels, they often come to wrong conclusions about the things Jesus said. These men were steeped in Jewish tradition, which said the Messiah would be a kind of political challenger who would overthrow the oppressive Roman occupation and restore glory to Israel. Jesus did tell them that he was going to die and that he was going to be raised again, but I don't think they really believed this because this didn't match what they believed about the Messiah. It didn't make sense that dying could be part of God's plan. What do we know about the woman who followed Jesus? These were the adoptive sisters and mothers of Jesus who believed in him and followed him from Galilee to take care of his needs and hear his teaching. As women, they could not be apprenticed to Jesus as students to a rabbi, but their devotion was personal. In a culture where women were of far lower legal standing than men, Jesus honored, dignified, and loved these women. Let's focus on one woman in particular who was ruined in the eyes of society. Her name was Mary Magdalene, and she was possessed by 7 demons when Jesus met her. You can imagine how being under the control of 7 demons would seriously ruin your social reputation. And yet Jesus, he didn't avoid her like a pious Pharisee would have done. He saw her, he loved her, he freed her from her demons, and he welcomed her as a follower. Outcasts of all kinds flocked to Jesus because he cherished and esteemed them. His kingdom was upside down. So we've introduced the characters, the male disciples and Mary Magdalene who followed Jesus, and the religious leaders who wanted him dead. On the night of the Passover celebration, one of Jesus' 12 disciples, Judas Iscariot, goes to the religious leaders tells them where Jesus is, betrays him, helps them arrest him in exchange for money. The next day, Jesus is unjustly tried, brutally flogged, killed on a cross to appease the crowds, and his broken body is placed in a tomb. That was Friday. This is where we pick up the story. I'm going to tell this story using verses from 3 of the Gospels because they each emphasize a different response to what happened next. The next day, on the Sabbath, the leading priests and Pharisees went to see Pilate. They told him, "Sir, we remember what that deceiver once said while he was still alive. 'After 3 days, I will rise from the dead.' So we request that you seal the tomb until the 3rd day. This will prevent his disciples from coming and stealing his body and then telling everyone he was raised from the dead. If that happens, we'll be worse off than we were at first." Pilate replied, "Take guards and secure it as best you can." So they sealed the tomb and posted guards to protect it. Early on Sunday morning, as the new day was dawning, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went out to visit the tomb. Suddenly, there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven, rolled aside the stone, and sat on it. His face shone like lightning, and his clothing was as white as snow. The guards shook with fear when they saw him, and they fell into a dead faint. Mary Magdalene came to the tomb and found that the stone had been rolled away from the entrance. Mary was standing outside the tomb crying, and as she wept, she stooped and looked in. She saw 2 white-robed angels, one sitting at the head and the other at the foot of the place where the body of Jesus had been lying. "Dear woman, why are you crying?" the angels asked her. "Because they have taken away my Lord," she replied, "and I don't know where they have put him." She turned to leave and saw someone standing there. It was Jesus, but she didn't recognize him. "Dear woman, why are you crying?" Jesus asked her. "Who are you looking for?" She thought he was the gardener. "Sir," she said, "if you have taken him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will go and get him." "Mary," Jesus said. She turned to him and cried out, "Rabboni," which is Hebrew for teacher. "Don't cling to me," Jesus said, "for I haven't yet ascended to the Father. But go find my brothers and tell them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." So they, that is Mary and the woman with her, rushed back from the tomb to tell his 11 disciples and everyone else what had happened. But the story sounded like nonsense to the men, so they didn't believe it. As the women were on their way, some of the guards went into the city and told the leading priests what had happened. A meeting with the elders was called, and they decided to give the soldiers a large bribe. They told the soldiers, "You must say, 'Jesus' disciples came during the night while we were sleeping, and they stole his body.' If the governor hears about it, we'll stand up for you so you don't get in trouble." So the guards accepted the bribe and said what they were told to say. Their story spread widely among the Jews, and they still tell it today. So what different reactions did we just witness? First, let's look at the religious leaders. And I'm going to dwell slightly on this one because there is so much application here. The priests and Pharisees had painted themselves into a corner. There was no way out of this that kept their pride intact. If they conceded that Jesus had really risen from the dead, that would mean they had murdered God's chosen one, and that would make them enemies of God. So they try not to think too much about the soldiers' deeply disturbing account, and they resort to bribery to keep it hushed up. If only they could have understood that Jesus died for his enemies. At any point, any one of those haughty leaders could have turned around and said, "You know what? This is getting ridiculous. I think this guy must be who he says he is. And in that case, he deserves authority over me. So I'm going to stop this nonsense. If they had done that, they would have experienced Jesus' overflowing love. They would have been saved from the comeuppance they deserved. Jesus loves his enemies. In fact, this is the whole reason he chose to die, to give his enemies the opportunity to become his friends. Romans chapter 5, verse 10 says, "Since our friendship with God was restored by the death of his Son while we were still his enemies, we will certainly be saved through the life of his Son." How does this apply to us? Well, every single one of us has made ourselves an enemy of God. We are all rebels and hypocrites. Like those Jewish leaders, we have defended our own authority over our lives at all costs. Our all-knowing Creator has our very best interests at heart, but we have rejected those plans and we've defined goodness for ourselves. When our priorities are twisted out of shape like this, we can't even live up to our own standards. We inevitably make decisions that damage ourselves, other people, and the world. We have smashed up what God loves. We have smashed up the relationship with God that he created us to enjoy forever. Obviously, that has consequences. We've earned ourselves estrangement from God and punishment for our rebellion. That would be justice. But no matter who you are, no matter what you've done, no matter how you've smashed it up, no matter whether society would call you a good person or a bad person, Jesus died for you. Since our friendship with God was restored by the death of his Son while we were still his enemies, we will certainly be saved through the life of his Son. Do you hear what Jesus offers to the enemies of God? Friendship, restoration, salvation, life. Jesus fixes what we break. That is mercy. What does it look like to accept that offer? Well, it could look like this. Jesus, you are who you say you are, the King, the creator of the universe. You deserve total authority over me. I have wronged you, and it would be fair to treat me as your enemy. But I believe you love me, you died for me, and you rose again to give me a new life. Thank you. Please have mercy on me and forgive me. Come and be the king of my life from now on. These are not magic words. This is just a prayer I came up with that reflects the heart of someone who wants to follow Jesus. If you read these words and think that they reflect your attitude towards God, then either you are already a follower of Jesus or there is nothing stopping you from becoming one. And I promise that it would be the best decision of your life. But if you look at those words and think, nah, that's not quite where my attitude is at, I just want to encourage you, think about why not. Try to pinpoint the exact reason that is holding you back, and then investigate that. Because I think you might be surprised to find how intellectually and emotionally compelling the reasons for belief are. So the religious leaders were hard-hearted. They tried to squash the news that Jesus was alive. Let's turn to the disciples and see how they responded. Mark says that they were grieving and weeping, and that is not surprising. Their beloved Jesus has been executed. Their world has ended. They fear being hunted down in a similar fashion for being Jesus' followers, so they are in hiding. Even though Jesus told them he would die and rise again, his brutal death quenched their hopes. They still believed the Messiah was meant to be politically triumphant, not executed. They still didn't understand how upside down the kingdom of God is. They felt like they had been living in a dream, and now they're finally coming up against harsh reality. Perhaps in their grief, they felt wiser, thinking, I won't get my hopes up again just to have them dashed. So when the women start adamantly claiming that they have seen the risen Jesus, they just put it down to hysteria. They don't believe it. It's going to take something a lot more concrete than the word of some woman who can't even legally be witnesses in court to change their mindset. In some way, you might identify with the disciples. You may have experienced bitter disappointment in your life or in your journey of belief. You may struggle to believe that God is trustworthy, or that he loves you, or that he is in control because of the things you've experienced: tragedy, injustice, abuse. You might think it's all wishful thinking. I've wised up now. I'm not going to get my hopes up just to get hurt again. And if you identify with that, I am so sorry for what you have experienced. You might feel that it would take a lot of convincing on rational and emotional levels before you could change your mindset. But as we will see, this was not the end of the disciples' story, and it doesn't have to be the end of yours. Let's turn to Mary Magdalene. The first thing I notice is her total devotion. Jesus is dead, but she still wants to take care of him in any way she can, even if it's only to put spices on his body. She is motivated out of deep gratitude to Jesus. When she sees the stone is rolled back, she is distraught. His body was all she had left to love and honor, and now someone has taken it away. Even when she sees angels, this thought is paramount in her mind. They have taken my Lord, and I don't know where they have put him. In her desperation, she begs a stranger in the garden to let her fetch Jesus from wherever they have put him, as if she could carry him herself. And what is it that cuts through her grief and confusion? Jesus says her name, Mary. And that's when she recognizes him and believes. She hears his voice and realizes, this is the Lord who knows me and loves me, who delivered me from demons and gave me a new life. It doesn't matter whether it's believable for people to come back from death. Here he is. He knows my name. He is alive again. Mary's belief is totally relational. She first believed in Jesus, not because of his claims, but because he gave her dignity. She believed he was alive again, not because an angel said so, but because she heard his voice speak her own name. Perhaps you understand Mary because your faith is similar. Maybe you believe because you've seen things in your life that can only be attributed to God. Maybe you know the way he's changed you, the misery and hopelessness that he has exchanged for joy and purpose. As we wrap this up, we have learned a lot about these different people by looking at their responses to the resurrection. But perhaps the most important thing we can learn is how Jesus responded to them. The religious leaders who got Jesus killed cared so much about protecting their own egos that they even stopped caring about the truth. But still, Jesus died for them, and even they would have received mercy if they only humbled themselves. Nothing we have done is too great for Jesus to wash away. No matter where you're at with God, his invitation of friendship is for you. The disciples were suspicious of good news because they had been so deeply hurt. Believing that Jesus was alive again and finding out they were wrong would be the cruelest disappointment. But when Jesus appeared to them, he did two things. He rebuked them for not remembering his promises, which turned out to be trustworthy, and he tasked them with spreading the good news to the rest of the world. He doesn't give up on them because of their lack of faith. Instead, he turns their fearful grief into joyful purpose. What if he did the same for you? Finally, Mary Magdalene didn't have anything to offer Jesus except her devotion, and that was enough. What an upside-down kingdom that this sinner, this outcast, this previously demon-possessed woman should be so loved by King Jesus that she was the first person he wanted to see when he left the tomb. No matter what our attitude towards Jesus, we do not change the truth that he is alive and he is the King. So will we let the truth change us? Let's finish with a table question, which is simply, what part of the Easter story have you most connected with tonight?